Why did Yakov go to Haran and spend those 20 years there? The same reason every one of us is here, and that is to channel divinity into the world, to integrate godliness into the world by interacting with the world the way that we're supposed to. And through our interactions with the world, when those interactions are the way they're supposed to be, we channel divinity into the world, we bring godliness into the world gets elevated. So Yaakov goes to Haran, a place of deep spiritual darkness and depravity. If he went there, he was there for a reason. And it wasn't just to get away because he could have gotten away in other places. Yes, it was family and all of those things, that's true, but there's more to it than that. And that is that there were sparks of godliness in Haran that needed to be elevated. And so Yaakov went there and spent those 20 years there, elevating the place, bringing godliness into it, etc.
But I thought that in those days before they got the Torah, they didn't, like it was separate, the Kedusha to the nation.
Good question. You know what, maybe the way to put it more specifically, perhaps, I'm just thinking now on the fly because that was a very good point, is the words that are used here are more about elevating the sparks that are there rather than channeling down. Now, generally those things they're not really synonymous, but they're almost synonymous because they go together, and where there's one, where there's the other. Maybe here there wasn't. That's a good point. So being more specific, he was there to elevate the sparks of godliness that were there. In order to do that, thank you, that was a very good question. In order to do that, he had to interact with the place where the sparks of godliness are found to be able to elevate them and bring them up to where they're supposed to be. And so that's why he went there, and he didn't shy away, he didn't lock himself in a closet, he worked. And he didn't just work, he had a very, very involved job. He had a very high-level executive position, running Lavan's entire sheep business. And it was a big business. It became much larger under Yaakov's stewardship. It was a very, very engaging job. He was deeply involved. And that the reality is, the more deeply one is involved with the world, the more opportunity there is to elevate sparks. The more opportunity there is to integrate godliness. That being said, it also comes with a risk. And the more, both in terms of amount and depth, the greater the extent to which one is involved in the world, interacting with the world, let's say on the world's terms. And by on the world's terms, I don't mean, what we're going to see, because part of that's going to be exactly the opposite, but on the world's terms, I just mean not just like walking down the street and being some mystic who's really out of touch. It means interacting with the world. Yaakov was a businessman. He did negotiations. He ran things. He was an executor. He was a doer. Interacting with the world in a regular, natural way, the more one interacts with the world as behaving, let's say, as a part of the world, the greater the opportunity to elevate sparks, to channel divinity, to have a positive influence, which is ultimately what we're here for. But the greater the extent, the greater the risk. It's a two-way street. There is always the possibility that a person is going to be influenced by the world rather than being the one who influences the world. You know, it's a metaphor that comes to mind. It's not the most beautiful metaphor, but in a sense, it's effective. If a person wants to, let's say a person grows up and for whatever reason they grow up in the world of combat sports and their dream is to be the world champion. They want to be the world champion in combat sports, in boxing, in MMA, whatever it is. The more daring and courageous they are in the opponents that they agree to fight, etc., the greater the opportunity they have and the greater the likelihood they're going to make it to world champion. But every time they up the ante, they're upping the risk. And in the fight game, the risk is get badly hurt or worse. So it's a two-way street. When we, and the reason that metaphor comes to mind is because in a sense it is a fight of sorts. That doesn't mean we're supposed to go out to fight the world. We are supposed to go out and interact with the world in a functional, responsible, practical way. And in general, one of the most fundamental Torah values there is, one of the most, is to always be looking to do everything we do in life in the most peaceful and harmonious way possible. It's not that we're not looking to fight with the world. I want to make that clear. I want to make sure there's no, confusion here. But the bottom line is we are, in doing so, in interacting with the world, in the hope that we're going to be able to influence the world, elevate the world, channel divinity into the world as it is, has a lot that stands in direct opposition to Torah values and to what we're trying to do. And by interacting with that world and exposing ourselves to those things, we put ourselves at risk of being influenced. So, there are traditionally in the world of, let's say, what would be called, Haredi or ultra-Orthodox or whatever it is, intensely Torah observant Jews, let's say, there is a very, very big subcategory, probably the majority, vast majority, of what would generally be described as this community, that kind of live in a way in which they isolate themselves from the world at large as much as possible. And you have even, for example, there are people who, they dress in a way that makes them very different to the world. Everything they do is very separate, and they might go into business or work and be very deeply involved, but there is actually, a practice that some people have where they take a separate name at work, and they take a secular name at work, and, the reason they're taking a secular name at work is not because they're trying to fit in, because they're not going to fit in as they are. You can hear the difference in the accent. Even if it's just a phone call, you can see the difference. They're not calling themselves whatever they're calling themselves at work to try to fit in. They're calling themselves a very secular name intentionally to create a boundary. So that there is me, who I am as a person, my own personal life and values. When I go to work, there's a boundary there. Separate name, separate part of life. I do what I got to do, but there's a very, very big barrier there. And none of that is really me. I'm separating that from who I am and from my personal life to the extent I even take a separate name to really create that boundary for myself. Our approach, the approach of Chabad, and that the Rebbe, pushed so strongly this idea. We just had the Kinus HaShluchim, we just had 6,000 Shluchim here. Every single one of whom is doing exactly what Yakov did, going out somewhere as an ambassador of godliness and divinity to channel and to uplift the world. Right? It's not hard. So our general approach and values, let's say, are not to have barriers and to shy away from the world as much as possible. It's the opposite. It's to do what Yakov did, get out there, engage. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that one cannot appreciate the fact that there are people who do have that, let's say, in a sense, a fear and want to create those boundaries and stay separated from the world as much as possible because, you don't have to look too far, either in distance or in time, to see, unfortunately, effectively endless examples of people who, went out to engage with the world with the best of intentions, and the way that things played out in their relationship with the world was not the way that they envisioned. It's a very natural thing. It's not unreasonable. And in a sense, I would use the word, and I want to be clear, I'm using this word without any judgment whatsoever, but in terms of, what those people set out to do or anticipated, what actually played out was a catastrophic failure in terms of what they had intended. It is. And I say that without judgment because it's difficult. And, I don't know that I would do any better than any of those people under the circumstances that they're in. But the point being, there is very real risk. Now, on one hand, a person could say, that's too risky, So I'm going to say here, right? Most people say, get in the boxing ring with whoever, or get in the octagon with whoever for, for an MMA match or for a boxing match. That risk is big. Not interested. I'm not getting in that ring. I will never step in that ring. There's no reason for me to step in that ring, and that makes a lot of sense. If there is someone for whom success in this sport is their number one value, then for that person, they're going to have to step into that ring. They're going to have the courage to do that. They're going to have to do it as frequently as they can, and to have as much courage as they can and accept the most difficult, challenging opponents that they can. And obviously that person is going to want to also make sure they're as prepared as possible. They train as much as possible up to the point of overtraining and not overtrain. They don't want to undertrain, they don't want to overtrain. They want to make sure they get the maximum possible amount of sleep and the best nutrition that they can get, so that their nervous system function is at its best, and their physical strength is at its best, and their reaction times are at their best, and their judgment is at its best. All of those things are critical, right? People in professional fighters, it's not necessarily the most intuitive thing, but one of the most important things, one of the top priorities that they have, throughout the year, let's say when it's off season, is sleep. Every single night. If they're training every day, the point of training is for the body to adapt. Those people are going to be getting, a lot of them will be getting 10 hours of sleep 7 nights a week, every night of the year. They're sleeping 10 hours a night. And to them, that's necessary for them to be at their best physically and neurologically. And they're putting themselves at a very high risk because that's important to them. But if they're going to do that and to not do your utmost to put yourself in the best position possible is a really, really bad idea. To get in the octagon, to get in the octagon or in a boxing match for a world championship match against either, if you're challenging the current champion, or for the world champion to be defending against the next best person who might be about to take their spot, their championship, or their position, their title as the world champion, to go in there after not having prepared properly, not having gotten enough sleep, and just, going on a bender all week and not sleeping properly and drinking and, and not training and whatever it is an insane thing to do. So Yakov went out into this world, and he engaged with the world and was deeply, deeply engaged. He had a very high level, high pressure, high stakes executive position running Lavan's entire business, and he became extraordinarily wealthy. He was deeply involved in all the minutiae of the business. But at the end of the day, Yaakov's priority, Yaakov didn't pursue wealth because he wanted to be wealthy. Yakov pursued wealth because in the wealth of Haran, there was godliness embedded, and he wanted to get as much of it as possible, elevated, uplifted, and out of there with him. And so while he was there, it says, Vayolen Shom, on the way there when he was traveling, he rested. When he got to Haran, there was no time for rest. Why not? Because he had a mission, he was a man on a mission, and the mission was very high stakes and very high risk. And so Yaakov spent his nights studying Torah, praying, plugging into Hashem, making sure that he mentally, emotionally, in terms of his values, was plugged in and aligned. That his mind and his heart were aligned with his true values, that he didn't lose focus, that he didn't lose track, praying to Hashem to give him the strength to do what he was there to do, to elevate those sparks without getting lost, without paying that price. So there was no time to rest.